Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed going through Chinese history year by year within 7 minutes. It's quite impressive, isn't it? How could such a huge empire hold together for such long periods of time? Well, to be sure, there were also times of crisis, usually towards the end of a dynasty. According to the classical Chinese history books, dynasties usually began with a number of strong and exemplary rulers, followed by less good ones, weaker ones over time, and dynasty usually ended in chaos under its utterly corrupt last emperors, before being replaced by a new dynasty that restored the empire and started a new dynastic cycle evolving along the same basic pattern. From a classical Chinese perspective, history thus evolves in a long series of dynastic cycles. What we have here, in fact, is a Chinese version of a cyclical time consciousness. According to this view, the basic pattern of dynastic cycles is repeated in similar ways again and again over time. In Chinese civilization and culture, history plays a central role. History books are among the most important pieces of classical Chinese literature. Yet those classics of Chinese history are not just about describing historical events. The focus is on what can be learned from history about what actions produce what kind of consequences. In the classical Chinese view, history presents a wealth of examples to be followed or not to be followed. The history of classical China, of imperial China, was extraordinarily long. However, the Chinese Empire entered a deep crisis in the 19th century that resulted in its end in the early 20th century, marking the transition from classical to modern China. This crisis was at least in part triggered by foreign trade. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Chinese tea started to be in high demand in England for afternoon tea and so on. Initially, English traders bought tea in China in exchange for silver, but this was expensive, and the British started to realize that those terms of trade were not really favorable to them, which is why they came up with a new business model. This new business model consisted of growing opium in British India, taking that opium to China, selling it to Chinese customers at huge profits, and using those profits to buy tea to be marketed in England. That proved to be a highly profitable business model. British opium trade flourished, but it led to a public health disaster in China, with a considerable part of the Chinese population becoming addicted to opium. To be sure, the importation of opium into China was prohibited at all times, but this prohibition was not sufficiently enforced by the Chinese authorities, so that it was rather easy for the British to smuggle their opium in. At some point, however, in the 1830s, the Chinese emperor decided to actually enforce the prohibition of the importation of opium. This was, of course, good for public health in China. But on the other hand, it put at risk the British business model that was all based on the opium trade. In the end, this led the British government to declare war on China and send its navy over there. The first so-called Opium War broke out. Thanks to their superior weaponry and organization, the British defeated the Chinese in a number of battles between 1840 and 1842. A second Opium War, in which the French participated as well, siding with the British, took place between 1857 and 1860. The end result of the Opium Wars was that China was forced to open its ports for foreign trade, including British opium trade. The Opium Wars had demonstrated the weakness of the Chinese Empire, which was an invitation also for other imperial powers to seek their interests in China. China has never been turned into an outright colony, but it was divided up into different interest zones of foreign powers, including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan. China was carved up like a melon or sliced up like a cake. In a series of unequal treaties, the Chinese Empire was forced to grant all kinds of privileges and monopolies for running industries and exploiting markets to foreign powers. Within Chinese society, all of this started to spark political upheaval, revolutionary movements began to form, and eventually the situation exploded in a revolution led by Sun Yat-sen that resulted in the deposition of the last emperor and the founding of the Republic of China. However, the Republic of China has never been successful. The authority of the central government remained weak, the provinces came to be dominated by warlords, and foreign imperial powers continued to exercise their pressure, extracting wealth, humiliating the local population, and bullying the Chinese state. In addition, in the late 1920s, a civil war broke out, opposing the Republicans on the one hand, and the Communist Party that had been founded in Shanghai in 1921 on the other hand. In the years before World War II and during the war, large parts of China were occupied by the Japanese, so that the struggle against the foreign invaders became a priority. But after World War II, the Chinese Civil War flared up again, and it was finally won by the Communists under the lead of Mao Zedong. The Communist Revolution of 1949 established the People's Republic of China. Yet this wasn't the end of revolutions. Rather, it became the starting point of a series of revolutionary campaigns launched by Mao Zedong in the following decades. One of these was the so-called Great Leap Forward, a campaign for an industrial revolution during which all available resources were focused on building a huge heavy industry for steel production within just a few years, which resulted in neglecting agriculture and triggered a hunger catastrophe that claimed an estimated 30 million lives. After that disaster, Mao Zedong was increasingly sidelined in the communist government, which made him look for ways to reassert his authority. And the way he chose to achieve that was to trigger another revolutionary campaign, the Cultural Revolution. Mao set in motion Red Guards, formed by students and school children, calling on them to tear down the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas, and to persecute people accused of being bourgeois elements, especially among government and Communist Party officials, teachers, scholars, and university professors. During the 10 years of upheaval and turmoil that ensued, much of China's cultural heritage was destroyed. Statues were smashed, temples burned, monasteries attacked, cemeteries desecrated. The Cultural Revolution caused immense damage, and many people are still traumatized by what happened. In hindsight, the Cultural Revolution is regarded as a mistake, even by the Chinese state and the Communist Party. Yet Mao is still revered throughout the country, everywhere in China. The official wording is that 70% of what Mao did was good and 30% bad. The turmoil ended only with Mao's death in 1976. 2 years later, a new leader, Deng Xiaoping, emerged victorious from the ensuing power struggle within the Communist Party. This marked a turning point in China's economic development. In order to restore the economy that had been deeply damaged by the Cultural Revolution, Deng Xiaoping started to introduce economic reforms step by step. In a first phase, the primary objective was to attract foreign investment, This is why special economic zones were established, where market economy rules applied and foreign investors were welcomed. Later, those special economic zones were gradually expanded, and finally the regulations allowing for private enterprises were extended to the whole country. This is what set China on a path of rapid economic growth for the following decades. As you can see on this chart, China's economy featured annual growth rates of around 10% on average from the end of the 1970s to 2015. An average growth rate of 10% means that the economy doubles in size every 7 years. To measure the impact of the Cultural Revolution that still deeply marks China, I invite you to watch this report and then move on to part 3.